The topic, as it's written on the board there, is rewiring student thinking. The subject itself we talk about is rewiring. And when we think about wiring, we think of hardwiring. We hardwire houses and we hardwire automobiles, and humans are actually hardwired. What does this mean? This means that you never forget to ride a bicycle. Your penmanship and handwriting is forever. The way you walk is permanently imprinted, and you take tests exactly the same as you always do. And you always make the same mistakes. Well, let me just kind of give you a little background. The sunset, Bel Air Beach. The reason I have this image there is because I wanted to remind myself that we are all wired for certain responses. What does this mean? This means that I go to the beach 4 or 5 times a week, thousands of times in my lifetime, and every day I notice the sun sinks into the water and that it actually drops down. But I know scientifically the earth is revolving. I know the earth is moving and the sun is stationary. But yet, even with this knowledge, I still imagine the sun moving into the west. This is called hardwiring. Now, to rewire, I would have to stand on the beach and imagine the earth is revolving while watching the sun get lower on the horizon. And now the topic I'm going to speak about is called the SAT. It's probably the teenager's greatest fear for those who are planning on going to college. No matter what your grades are, the SAT score determines if you're going to college, which college you're going to, if you get scholarships. And amazingly, it is given to 2.2 million students every year. Of the 2.2 million students who take it each year, and we're going to talk about just reading, writing, and language, they always fall on the identical bell curve. What does this mean? This means that College Board, the people who actually write this test, have designed a test that in 52 reading questions, they can separate 2.2 million students onto one bell curve. If you take it in October, November, December, March, May, or June, it is identical. The bell curve is identical. Everything is identical because that's what makes it fair. It would not be fair if the October test or the March test weren't identical. If you'll look at the image I have, it is broken down into 4 categories, A, B, C, and D. And these are the students as they're breaking down. The test writers have designed this test that everyone is between 400 and 600. Most of the United States is between 400 and 600. When we get to 700, we're down to 2% of test takers. I'm hitting something here, making too much noise. The average reading score on the SAT is a 480. 480. It is such a low number. What does that represent? It means that the individual who gets a 480 actually missed half of the questions that were asked. Half. 52 questions, he missed or she missed a minimum of 26. And the difficult about that is it's in English. You don't have to be creative. You don't have to come up with your own answers. You only have 4. They wrote this test so that everyone would fit into the appropriate category. I'll give you an example. The A represents students who are average readers. What does this mean? It means that the students who chose A will usually flip back and forth in the test looking for the answer. They've always looked for the answers. Every test they've ever taken has always been cat, dog, boy, phospholipid bilayer. Cat, dog, boy, Versailles Treaty. Cat, dog, boy, magical realism. They're used to seeing the answer in the textbook, in their notes, on PowerPoint. And what do when they take this test? They flip back and forth until they find it. Red hat in the passage, red hat in the answer. And by the way, rule number 1, if it's in the passage, it can't be in the answer. The reason they do that is to make sure that student A doesn't accidentally pick D, gets a better score, ruins the bell curve. Okay, let me go down on this. Okay, 5 reading passages. The first one is literature. It's a narrative about a person. It's usually a cultural characteristic, but it's not difficult to read. It is not Charles Dickens, and of course it is also not 6th grade reading. It is at a early college reading level. The second one is social studies. There's always 2 science passages. They're not complicated. It's not physics, it's not chemistry. The science is always, why do birds fly in a V formation? Or if you add more scent, do you get more bees? It is not complicated science. Global conversation, more difficult. It's generally an essay or a speech given by Abraham Lincoln, Henry David Thoreau, maybe somebody from the 18th century, but is trying to challenge students to see, can they read a more archaic language? Passage 1 and 2, same themes written by 2 different people that just disagree. The graphs are not written by math or science teachers, so they're never complicated. It's not a difficult test. It just seems like it. Every question on every test, on every passage, is identical. Every test has most nearly means, which are 9 vocab type questions. Primary purpose is the theme. They call it main purpose. Primary purpose indicates that, characterized by attitude shifts, best evidence, best describes. These are the questions on every test. What does this mean? It means that the questions are not important. What does that mean? It also means that if you're answering the questions, you're probably going to miss it. Different from a high school test. And this is what I have learned. This is what students say. They walk out of the test and they say, I didn't think it was too difficult. And then they say, I think I did well on the test. And then 3 weeks later they say, I thought I did better. I thought I did better. And they're so disappointed. My score was the same on almost every previous score. I took the test 3 times and got the same score each time. And now the hardwire. The reason they got the same score on each test was that they answered the same questions identically 3 times. They always pick the answer that they like. Well, who would pick one they don't like? Cat, dog, boy, perspicacity. Oh, I don't even know what that means. Why would I pick that one? Maybe I should pick it because it isn't A, B, or C. But in every case, the reason why students get their score is they always pick answers they like. They always pick answers they like. Let me go back. Oops. Nobody picked D. A very, very small group picked D. The group in A didn't like D. It sounded awful. B, they're readers, they're average readers, but they didn't like D either. The students in group C went from 550 to 680. These are really smart kids. These are the ones going to college. Well, they didn't like D either. What was wrong with D? And it sounded awful. It isn't what they're used to learning. It wasn't in the passage. It doesn't answer the question. So how do they do better? If you want to move up, and this is why we talk about rewiring, if you want to improve your score, if the test never changes, it always comes from textbooks, novels, journals, short stories, and all the questions are always identical. That means the answers will always be identical. You got the same score because you picked the one you like every single time. You want your score to go up? Rewire. You have to change. You have to pick one you don't like. Even when you know it's one you don't like. Difficult to do. Okay. This is a question on one of the tests. Really difficult vocabulary. Simple, straightforward, modest, unadorned, easy. Really complicated vocabulary. Well, actually not. But the problem is, everybody thinks they know, but by the way, this particular question was missed by more than 80% of test takers. This one. When you came into my classroom on Monday, I asked, how did you do on the math test? And you said it was simple. And then when you came in my classroom on Tuesday, I asked you, how was the math test? And you said it was easy. And I said, wait a second, was it uncomplicated or was it effortless? And then you realized at that point, maybe you should have said the test was straightforward. But you're used to using easy and simple and every one of these words in the same context, even though they are different. This is an answer to a simple passage, and it's rather a simple question. The passage was simply, a young boy loves to read so much he wants to be a writer. He loves to read so much he wants to be a writer. That is the theme of the entire passage. Question number 2, main purpose. Well, we've seen this before. And then he gives you line numbers. Why would he give you line numbers? The other questions don't have line numbers. He gave you line numbers so that you would go back and reread it. And it said, A, introduce characters in the story. I promise you, in lines 1 through 10, their characters are introduced into the story. It's true, it's logical, it's in the passage. B, the difficult conditions he endured in his childhood. In lines 1 through 10, it said he was raised in a very strict environment. They didn't have any money. B is true and logical and in the passage. C said, the passion that drives the action the narrator recounts. The passion that drives the action. Sounds like a Tom Cruise movie. D, the narrator's aspirations before he met a bookseller. The correct answer, C. C, the passion that drives the action. What is the passion? What is the action? He goes to a bookstore and gets a book. And yet C was the correct answer because the theme of the passage was a young boy loves reading so much that he wants to be a writer. But the question said main purpose. Main purpose. It's on every section. It's on every test. What he really wants to know, are you a good reader? Are you a good reader? Did you know the theme of the passage? And then you can just black out all the questions, go through all the answers, and just pick the theme. But this isn't anything. You would fail high school if you did that. You need to know all the details, all the facts. You are sitting there and you're learning the same way. And you memorize and you underline and you highlight. But the theme is the only thing you need to know to do well on this test. But they forgot to tell you that. You have to rewire. On this particular passage, a man loves taking public transportation even though it's not perfect. But he didn't say public transportation. He used the word practice. Practice, like volleyball, like basketball, like medicine, practice. Since when is taking a bus a practice? 6 tests later, the passage was about they should publish null research so future researchers know what failed. And they said a common practice in reporting of research studies, and they should have a change to that practice. Wait, practice. I thought it was taking public transportation. And they keep using words that you're not used to either using in your vocabulary or in anything else you do. There's a point to all this. Reading. You have to read everything. You have to read everything. No facts, no fact questions, no phospholipid bilayer, no Versailles Treaty, no journalism, no public knowledge. What they really want is, did you understand what you read? Not what he said, but what he meant. He said that he never left the house without putting on a hat. Is this about hats? And the answer was no. So you have to pick meaning. So when he said the passion that drives the action, it isn't what he said, passion and action. It's what he meant. And then, of course, we have this theme, which is one sentence. So what do I mean by rewiring? I want students to quit thinking in the usual customary way they do in school, only this time they have to rewire in their thinking, ignore all the facts, ignore all the words, ignore all the things that sound right. Pick the theme. Cross out the questions, pick the theme. You'll get it right.